Good evening, everyone. Happy Pride, and welcome to our panel discussion. My name is Kathy Taylor. My pronouns are she, her. I am the Community Services Department's Equity and Inclusion Officers, and I'm a part of Out in Santa Monica, which is the LGBTQ plus affinity group for the city. Out in Santa Monica is proud to put on tonight's event, Advancing Trans Equity, discussion on heightened visibility and attacks. I would like to welcome and thank everyone for joining us for an engaging conversation with trans global leaders in healthcare, law, sports, and the workforce as they discuss the pressing issues of our time and offer solutions to the barriers that the trans community is facing. Hard-fought visibility for the trans community has had some positives, but the surge in visibility has vastly outstripped any real improvement in the material conditions of trans people's lives. While trans visibility in the media has increased exponentially, organized transphobic campaign groups have proliferated and legal attacks on trans rights have ramped up a level we have never seen before. Panelists will discuss these issues and what we can do at a city level, community level, and in our personal lives to advance trans equity, be better allies, and create a better, safer, and more inclusive world for our trans neighbors, friends, and community members. Now I'll turn it over to Miles Friesen, a colleague and a good friend of mine, to introduce our moderator.
Thank you, Kathy Taylor. And happy Pride, everyone. My name is Miles Friesen, and I'm a trans employee of the City of Santa Monica. Personally, it's been an honor to be a part of putting together this panel for Pride. I'm also part of a larger team of employees that have worked over this past year to advance racial equity and inclusion. A good chunk of my role in that is being the co-founder and co-lead the employee group, the Santa Monica Alliance for White Anti-Racists, David Gardinier, who also was a part of putting together this panel. In that vein, this Pride Month, our team thought it was absolutely essential to devote time and space, not only during Pride Month, but year-round, to amplify the voices of LGBTQ plus community members who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Past year, trans people have been left with the challenge of how to celebrate Pride when there's so much heinous legislation directed towards us. We are the target of an ongoing and dehumanizing debate as 33 states are pushing more than 100 laws and bills, many of which have already passed with an embarrassingly large amount of community support. And yet still, our community continues to fight, continues to educate, continues to build one another up, and celebrate our many gendered selves. I want to take a minute to thank the City of Santa Monica for continuing to support not only giving a voice to marginalized communities that we don't often hear from, but also to their commitment to learning from those voices and then making better informed decisions as we all move together towards the goal of creating a more just, equitable, safe, and welcoming city. Lastly, this panel would not have been possible without the help of an amazing trans community builder, Liz Krieger, connected us with many of the trans leaders that you're going to be hearing from tonight. Beyond being a tireless and longtime advocate for the trans community, she's also the community relations rep and marketing strategist for HealthNet's Community Partnership Program. Thank you so much, Liz. And before I introduce our moderator, I want to let anyone know who's watching that you can submit any questions you might have through the Q&A feature on your screen, and we will collect those and discuss them during the Q&A session at the end of the panel. And now I'd like to introduce you to our facilitator this evening, the incomparable Jasmine Creighton. For more than 3 decades, Jasmine has worked as a tireless advocate for the trans community, while at the same time carving out her career in the entertainment industry. She's the Associate Director for the Asian Pacific AIDS Intervention Team in Los Angeles, and she's also the creator of a program named the Midnight Stroll, which brings awareness and needed health care supplies for street-based sex workers to empower them to embrace comprehensive community resources such as HIV testing and treatment, housing services, substance abuse counseling, legal and victim advocacy, and medical services. Jasmine also is the co-executive producer of a play and a documentary that challenges viewers to move past their preconceived stereotypes about the complexity of gender identities and orientations, so they can see the commonalities that we all share as human beings. Please join me in welcoming Jasmine Creighton.
Miles, Kathy, David, thank you so much, the City of Santa Monica. It is truly an honor to be here, and I'd like to welcome each and every individual that is on this special event tonight. Happy Pride, and what an honor to be here. And I want to get this panel started, so I want to introduce you to our panelists. And must I say that each and every one of you are worthy of everything good in the universe, and that you're perfect, whole, and complete in this moment. So let's start off with panelists. Number one, Patricio Manuel, better known to friends, family, and fans as Pat, is the world's first professional male boxer who happens to be transgender. Prior to transitioning, Pat was a 5-time national champion in the amateur women's division, participating in the first ever U.S. women boxing trials for the 2012 Olympics. He stepped back into the ring in 2016 in the amateur male division and won. He debuted with Golden Boy Promotions, and in 2018, he won a 4-round fight. Please help me welcome Patricia. Pat, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Nice to have you here. Next, our second panelist is Queen Victoria Ortega. She uses she/her pronouns, and Queen Victoria believes in leadership through service. As a consultant, she provides strategy and capacity building to various organizations. She also serves as Queen of the World Court, and she is the president of Flux, both international networks dedicated to raising the profile of trans and gender nonconforming communities. Queen Victoria Ortega leverages her intersectionality to guide organizations and systems towards transformational change that is both meaningful and effective. Find out more at www.queenvictoriaortega.com. Welcome, Queen Victoria.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and happy Pride.
Awesome. Third, last but never least, is Maria Carmen Heightened. Is a transgender woman, a first-generation Filipina American, and a California civil rights attorney. She currently works as a complaint resolution officer at the Office for the Prevention of Harassment and Discrimination at UCSF. Maria has over 2 decades of LGBTQ activism. Maria's current community work focuses on racial justice, gender equality, gender equity, and criminal justice reforms, including specifically reforming systems that unjustly and disproportionately criminalizes LGBTQ identities and BIPOC communities. Please welcome Maria Carmen Heightened.
Thank you, Jasmine, and thank you to the City of Santa Monica for providing this space, and thank you, community, for sharing this moment with us. Happy Pride. I just want to say I came here today. I work for UCSF, but my views here are my personal views. It doesn't reflect my organization. And, I'm an attorney, so I need to say this, that, I'm not giving legal advice here. If ever I have to talk about something legal, it's just legal information. Please don't take them as a legal advice. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward.
Excited to have you here, and let's get this started. My first question to each panelist, and I will give you, the time that you need to speak on it. But we want to know is, how did you come to be the magnificently gendered person you are today? And can you tell us a little bit about your journey, Pat?
Oh, you're kicking me off. Well, it's interesting when I've been really reflecting, especially this past year with the pandemic and really being forced to be grounded. I'm just really reflecting on the fact that I knew who I was at a very, very early age. I cannot remember a time where I ever thought I'm a girl. That thought never came to me. It was always I'm a boy. I'm a boy who will grow into a man with a beard, and hopefully was going to be 6 feet tall. I missed that by 6 inches, but I got the beard part at least down. And I think so often we completely disrespect the wisdom of children. And when they often tell us exactly who they are, adults often, if it doesn't seem to fit into the narrative that we want children to grow up into or what we have been programmed to say is the acceptable path forward, we alter the path they were going to go on. And that was my journey. Is I knew who I was. I kept quiet. I was a really quiet child in general. I kept it to myself. But I felt something wasn't particularly right with me as I was being pushed into places and labels like girl spaces, going to an all-girl school, for example. And I think the girls even recognized there that I was the one boy because I was incredibly popular, even though I wasn't even trying. And it was boxing that really brought me back in a long bout way to my gender identity that I am now. I got involved in boxing when I was about 16 years old, and if my grandma's in attendance, I know she was trying to get on, or if not, she'll see the recording. Hi, Grandma. Thank you for getting me in boxing. She was the one that took me to my first boxing lesson down in downtown LA. And it was when I got into that sport and I reconnected with this image of a fighter and the particular masculinity that I saw around the images of a fighter that I started really being able to grasp on first my masculinity and then eventually being not only that I'm a masculine person, but I'm actually a man at this.
Thank you. Thank you for this. And Victoria?
Well, how did I become the person I am today? I think that, first of all, obviously, I'm a proud Latinx plus-size woman, so I became the magnificently gendered person I am today through lots of hormone replacement therapy. And this particular plus size took a lot of donuts, but that being put aside, I came to the realization also at a very young age, but it really wasn't until I hit puberty that I knew something was up. We all have these particular dreams that take place at that time. And I was always told that I was wrong. I think that's definitely one of the things that is oftentimes told to us, that we're like evil deceivers and make-believers, when the reality is we are as true as it comes. I think that that's one of the beautiful things about being a trans person is we know ourselves at a depth and at a place that not many people get to walk that journey. So I think that that's where the magnificence of being a person of trans experience, which oftentimes get asked, if I could be born again, would I be born a different person? I'm like, hell no. I love being a person of trans experience. My journey is that of, I'm born and raised in Boyle Heights to a Latinx family that is not only part of the history here locally, and that was engendered into my personality as a person who has social responsibility to larger community. And my mother also liked to live fabulously and in another century, as you can tell from my house. I do too. So that's me. That's who I am. And yes, it's in the hood and the projects. And this is what makes me is I happen to like glittery stuff, but I also like my community. And I think that one major part and ingredient to who I am is not only my personal journey, but that it's been a we journey. So people like yourselves, including Jasmine, including Maria Carmen, and including Patricio, are part of my journey. So I'm just really thankful to get to share space with all three of you and with everyone that's in attendance.
Thank you, Carmen. Thank you. Maria Carmen? Oh, you're muted. You're muted. Maria, you're muted. Mm-hmm.
I now have the experience of being told that I'm muted, which is like, a thing now. Anyways, I was just saying, thank you, Queen Victoria and Jasmine. We come a long way from the streets of Los Angeles, doing our thing, surviving and then working and fighting. We have, we are now here, and thank you. And Pat, I don't know Pat personally yet, but I am definitely a fan, and I know your story. So it's really nice to meet you today. um, I think I'm like Pat in a way that I cannot pinpoint the exact time in my life where I know or I have an awareness that I am different or I don't identify, in the male gender. What I do know vividly is I knew that I was different and I don't identify as a boy before I first learned how to read. And I first learned how to read at the age of 3. So I could say that before years old, or maybe around 3 years old, sometime there, I knew and I have an awareness that I am not a boy, or I am not the gender that was assigned to me or was, told to me that I am. I was raised in the Philippines, in a single parent home. My dad left my mom before I was born. My mom has 9 siblings, so it's a very big family. So I basically was raised by the whole village, which are my mom's siblings. There are, uncles and aunts, and then older cousins. And so at an early age, I I am very comfortable being around women because I feel that I relate more there. Unlike my male cousins, I don't like to hang out with my uncles, doing all the masculine things. I like being with the aunties and my older cousins and my older sibling who's a woman. Um, Hanging out with them, doing stuff, cooking, playing those toys like dolls and playing house and all that stuff. I gravitated more towards that. So I have an awareness. And as a young kid, I don't really, you know, I don't engage in critical thinking about what my gender is. I just look up to people and then I tell to myself, I want to be like that someday. And all of those were like, the women in my I want to be like my aunt someday. She's so pretty, but she's also super smart. Or I want to be like my mom, or I want to be like my cousin, but I never see myself, growing up to be like my uncle or my, male cousins and all that. So I have an early um, recollection of like awareness of my own perception of who I am. But of course, growing up in the Philippines is very conservative. It's Catholic. It's very traditional. And then, Philippines is one of those countries that experience several waves of colonialism. So there's a lot of distorted understanding of identity and, who you are and where you come from or, your place in society. So I wasn't sure what I was experiencing. I know that someday, like Patricia said, I will grow up as a woman, even though I don't look like that back when I was a kid. I knew that someday I will develop into a woman just like my auntie, my women cousins, and my sibling. And so until I didn't transition until I went to college, where I had become more independent, and I went to the city because I used to live in the mountain area. And I went to college, and then I became active in the LGBTQ community because I joined the LGBTQ student organization and I met other transgender women. That's the first time that I thought, it became possible to me that I can actually live like the gender that's inside. And so that's when I started transitioning by starting by, wearing women's clothes, stealing clothes, you know, uh, going to my sister and my mom's closet and they'll, putting in my bag and like going into the bathroom in the school to change my clothes secretly, wearing a bra and stuff like that. And then started taking hormones, which, that time and until now, actually, in the Philippines and in many countries that is not America, there's still no healthcare. So we have to do what we can. So that time we were taking birth control pills because birth control pills have estrogen in them. So I remember like having friends and asking them, "Can you go to the clinic and get a birth control pills?" And like, "Give it to me, I'll pay you." Or like we would just go to the drugstore and buy birth control pills and say, "It's for my sister, it's for my aunt," but I would take them. That's how I started. And at the time, I didn't have a full understanding of, gender identity and sexual orientation, but I was experiencing a lot of discrimination and bullying and violence, and also feeling like I don't have power in society. So that's also the same time when I became very active in political activism, and I started as a student leader back in the Philippines, and then went to the U.S. and became very active in HIV/AIDS work, because that's where a lot of the work started in our community, and then decided to go to law, and now so that's kind of like a brief thing of my journey.
Well, it is absolutely stunning and beautiful, and I'm so glad each and every one of you made the decision not to abandon yourselves and to survive this whole process. Not only survive, but thrive. So it's an honor to have each and every one of you here. We're going to continue my questioning. The next question I have for you is, within the past few years, there has been a surge in media visibility around trans people and trans issues. What do you think are some of the pros and cons that have come as a result of this visibility? And anyone can answer this. Queen, let's start with you.
I definitely think that, can you hear me? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I think that visibility plays a very important role, but how does that visibility look? So one of the issues is that visibility oftentimes takes whatever either brings shock and awe or attention or sensationalism to communities. So I think that one of the cons has been you get a very specific view of what trans people might look like if you look at what was called the transgender tipping point in 2014 with Laverne Cox on the cover of Time magazine. Then you kind of have all the celebrity trans people that come out, which, are part of our community, but we don't all look the same. So I think that's one of the things that has happened with visibility. Now, in regards to one of the things that we've also seen around media haven't seen around media is you get everything that's affecting or being anti-trans, but we're also not hearing the success stories of individuals who are changing the world every single day through just working their job or changing their field or creating innovation in our fields. And those are the stories that you do not get to hear. So for me, one of the things that is so important is that we look at also financial literacy and wealth management. That's been my plan for the next 10 years. Back in 2005, I looked at economic empowerment and creating trans-specific job fairs, which great, we have now a saturated market of trans workers in the nonprofit sector. But we also can be business owners, inventors. We can own several businesses. We are creative people who also have the talent to have our pulse on the future. We are the future, in fact. And I think that's one of the things that is being missed in media and visibility is that we are the very definition of diversity, inclusion, and social justice. Look at the people that are in equity work. Look at the people who are on this panel. We're people of color from different backgrounds, different gender identities, and we also have a professional leadership role in and have changed our fields. Like that is what we have, and that's what media and visibility is missing. Is that we are not we're not a community to be thought of as in a charitable way. Is you're missing the bus. You need to hire trans people because we enrich your space.
Thank you. Thank you, King Victoria. Delicia.
Yeah, I mean, visibility is so interesting. Oh, getting a little echo. Does everyone hear me okay? Okay. Yeah, visibility is so interesting because I feel like it is double-edged sword doesn't even feel like an appropriate terminology. I'll start with the negative and then I'll end on the lighter note of like the positivity of it. But definitely the negativity of it is, like Queen Victoria said, we're seeing a limited amount of representation. There's definitely about sensationalism. There's definitely a fixation on the trauma and not the triumphs. We, as someone who is in the media, like I feel like it's constantly talking about, oh, you went through so much to get here. And I've really taken to a point where I'm like, I'm tired of talking about it. I'm tired of talking about the trauma. You can go Google it. There's plenty of stuff. Like, let's actually focus on all the other things I'm doing. Let's focus on the things that I have won. Let's not put the onus on me to dissect why people are transphobic. Like, interview them, find out from them. I don't want it to always be about that this is a struggle. And that is a part of the reality. But how do we have a balance of like, yes, there is trauma. Yes, there is oppression. Yes, we are constantly having to navigate not only systemic oppression, but the way that boils down to even in our personal lives, walking down the street, depending on if you are viewed as trans, can be a death sentence in this country. And as much as we like to say how far ahead we are, we all know that when we are visible, we also have targets on our back, whether that's visibility in terms of representation or being in media coverages, or that's visibility in someone seeing you and saying, hey, that's a trans person. We have a long ways to go until we also acknowledge, like, we are not new. Like, the medical technologies and medical interventions are new, but we have existed. And what happened in the erasure of previous trans representation is really important as well. There are many, many stories of trans people who did amazing, wonderful things and also just existed and also were everyday parts of communities that got erased. So I would also like to see some of our visibility be a return to acknowledge, like, hey, you've been here. This isn't something new. This isn't something that's just popping out, and not that if it's new, it's a bad thing. But as someone who's really invested in my history, and, maybe this comes from the trauma of coming from the diaspora that was shaken up and completely torn apart from slavery. Like, I want to find my roots not only as a African descended person, but also as someone who is trans, and know that, like, I had a place in those communities, and that it was very intentional that these narratives and these stories of trans people were erased, so we can interrogate why was it so important we were removed, and why is this continuing nowadays. We're watching still whatever was planted to remove us is still being in place now. And that's what we're seeing with all these bills and all this violence that is being thrown at trans people as we become more visible. And on the positive side, visibility is incredibly important. As I said, I was a kid who knew who I was, but there was no one for me to point to and be like, oh, that's who I am. That's who I'm going to grow up into being. And I'm really jealous of, kids now have so much representation and so much knowledge and so much access to gender affirming care, like whether that's through therapists or actually getting medical interventions. And we're seeing so many of these trans healthcare bills targeting children specifically because these kids are saying, that's who I am. I'm claiming my self-determination, I'm claiming my autonomy, and I'm claiming who I am growing up into being. And they are really scared that these children are really stepping into their power way earlier than so many of us were able to, just because we didn't even know it was possible. So this is a huge thing about representation and visibility, is it makes the path hopefully easier for the people who are to come.
Excellent. Thank you. Maria Carmen?
I just want to say those are all great, and I affirm all of those comments by Queen Victoria and Patricia, and I just want to add my thought on this is there's been a lot of visibility in the past years, but we also saw, a rise in violence and backlash, including the killings. And I know I don't want to talk about these things anymore because I don't want violence to define my life anymore. I just want to honor that this is still a truth in our community. And it's not just the visibility in the media. We also became target after gay marriage because we were the low-hanging fruits. So, the next thing after the GL and the LGBT would be, the T, because we are just out there in the public, in the media, and everyone can see us, and so we became targeted. But just to add, so that's the flip side of visibility is we became more, we were identified as targets. I just want to add to what already Patricia and Queen Victoria was saying about the visibility to me, and like for me, what I perceive as like the wrong message that's being sent out. I'll look into this into two aspects. First, of like who are the ones who are visible or are being given the platform, who are being highlighted, and some of them, a lot of them are celebrities. A lot of them are, for example, Caitlyn Jenner, are people in privilege. And, having worked at this community for a long time, I know a lot of people in this community, mothers and community mothers and community fathers, our siblings who have done the work and done the footwork and the grassroots work for us to be where we are right now, and they are not being highlighted. You don't see them in covers of magazines because all the ones we see are the ones who are celebrities and who have access to that kind of privilege. And then the other aspect I want to point out is the focus on like what is socially acceptable for trans people. When you look at who is visible and what is the narrative that's being created in the media is a lot of these trans people who are visible are very beautiful, very glamorous, very good looking. They're dressed very well. There's like some kind of respectability aspect on it because they're like well educated or they broke through barriers, which is fine. And we should celebrate that, just as I want to celebrate my achievement because I became a lawyer. But that's not just that's just like a very small fragment of our community. A lot of us are not into, fitting in that mold of like glamour or beauty or someone who has the privilege of wealth or education. And those people are not being highlighted. So there's a false narrative being floating around of like, trans people as, these beautiful, glamorous people, who are like, powerful people, and we are powerful, but I'm just saying like that's only a small fragment of us, and there's a lot of us who are not being highlighted. And it brings me back to Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson. They started the Stonewall. They were, living on the streets. They were poor. They were experiencing being unhoused and, not having employment. They were protesting. They don't fit the mold of like a respectable, beautiful, glamorous person. And, there was a time when they were being excluded at the Pride celebrations because some of the, LNG leaders in the community thought that they would send a wrong message because, the LNG yuppies, the young professionals who want to send a message that this community are smart people, educated, we are lawyers, doctors, etc. And having Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson up there would send the wrong message. And, we all know that famous speech by Sylvia Rivera when she basically yelled at everyone about like, why would you exclude me? I have done this work for you, etc. So it brings me back there, and it surprises me that that's like many, many years ago, but that's still where we are right now. Right? So we are still, as trans community, our ancestors basically started the revolution, and we are still fighting the revolution, but we still don't belong, and we are still fighting for that space. And when it comes to like access to power and privilege and wealth, we are outside. But when it comes to fighting, going into the street and doing the work, it's always us that's there. So I think that's what I want to add to that piece. Like I want to critique the fact that the representation in media is not representation of our community. And although we do are like some of us are like that, a huge fragment of our community is not represented.
So in this moment, like, what do you feel are the most important issues facing the trans community? And how does this compare with the coverage of trans issues that we see in the media? Did you see them?
I mean, I feel like this is a tricky question because there are certain things that are just ranked in terms of, are people not being murdered? Are people having access to food? Are people having safe housing? Like, not just having housing, but like, is it safe? Access to healthcare? Like, these things are just like basic living functions. But I also want to push that every issue matters. Every issue is important because we get distilled down to just caricatures. And when we are in various different spaces, we're reclaiming our place in this world and being visible. So I am slow to say if anything is necessarily an issue we shouldn't be tackling, because I'm tired of us being regulated to like, are you just making sure we're not dying? Like, we deserve the world. We deserve to have every access to everything. And, maybe that's greedy, but I'm dreaming big. Like, I want to see us everywhere. I want to see every issue matter just as much as the other one. And especially as we're in a time right now, in particular, where sports are being attacked. So many bills are being used. And as a wedge, but I think it's very, very obvious, like, it's not just about sports. This isn't just about being access to a sport, which is incredibly important. This is particularly about removing someone's right and access and targeting children in particular. And often healthcare bills are lobbied in with these as well. I think everything ends up getting super interconnected. So if we are to relax in one area, that means that another part is going to come up in terms of them trying to take more of our rights away.
Yes, excellent. Maria Carmen?
Yes, I totally agree with that. This is a trap question. Because, and you can like, trust me, I used to be a beauty queen, so I know a trap question when it's like asked. I agree. There's like, we are not even there yet. As human beings, as trans and non-binary human beings, we are not even in a part of our journey in society where we can actually say that, this was our problems and this is now our problem. Because the problems that we have many years ago and Sylvia Rivera and Marsha Johnson had back in the day is still the same problem we have right now. I'm just going to point out the basic thing, and Patricia said, like, having the right to live and not face violence and not live our life in fear. That's always going to be there. So I'm going to set that aside for now. For what I think, this is just my personal opinion, is what matters today. And this opinion is focused, here in this country. I think economic justice is a very, very important issue for trans community today, because in this country, you're not going to go anywhere if you don't have the means to live, but also if you don't have access to building yourself and advancing yourself, right? And when I say economic justice, I talk about access to education that will change your life and make you, turn your life around, or maybe make you a wealthy person. If that's what you want to do as a trans person, you have the right to do that. And, access to jobs, not just jobs for the sake of jobs, but jobs that pay really good, jobs that will give us security, that we don't have to fear anymore of like losing this job and applying for jobs. Because I don't know about you, but for me, the job searching and the process of looking for jobs is always a traumatic event, because it's always hard to put myself out there and like police what I'm gonna say or what I'm gonna wear, or like how much of the tea I'm gonna bring out to the job interview, or and the resume, right? I write my resume and I'm like, oh, I have to put my community service things there, but because I want the employer to know that I'm a person who cares, but also I don't want to put too much there that they will be like, oh, there's so much tea, she's gonna be a problem. right? So there's a lot of that, and we need to change all of that and make the job and the work, the workplace very accessible, very safe, and very comfortable for trans people. So we don't have to hide ourselves, we don't have to shrink ourselves, and we will have security. Because once you have that security, once you have that access, it will change your life. And it will change, it will provide you the ability to get secured housing, better healthcare, and all that. But of course, I stand for the proposition that healthcare is a right. It should be given to anyone regardless. But in the current system that we have, I think access to fair employment, access to fair education, and all the basic services that falls into that category of economic justice. I think that's very important. And we haven't been talking about that for a long time, because for all the years that I remember working in this community, I've always just been trying to say, please don't kill us. That's always the advocacy. Don't kill us, let us live. But now I want to say, like, okay, I reached this age. Now, give us something, give us the fair share of the dream, right? The American dream. Let us thrive, because it's more than just being alive, it's also being successful. And a lot of us, and I respect that, a lot of us wants to be wealthy, wants to have a family, wants to have generational wealth, want to be able to travel the world, wants to have a legacy. We should be able to do that, because, that's part of the promise of America to us. When we, for me, when I came here, but, when you're born here as well, or for all of us who are here. So that's what I want to
Excellent.
highlight.
Thank you. Queen Victoria.
I just want to say, Carmen, 10 points, the crown. So I actually want to challenge everyone that is watching today, and even ourselves, to think about, I think the biggest issue is implicit bias that then continues to push down on the trans community as a whole. That sometimes people are not aware. We're not aware of how we are implicitly biased towards trans community. And the realization of that happening and that not being talked about is what allows it to continue to perpetuate, right? We're not able to then access Maslow's hierarchy of needs and thinking about what everybody needs. It's not, we're not asking for something that's foreign to everyone, for example, who's watching. Everybody who's watching and talking in the world, all 7 billion people living in it, want to have self-actualization, want to have, prestige or feeling of accomplishment. We want to have a sense of belonging. We want to feel security and safety. And we also want to have food, water, and a place to lay our head at night. It's not like something completely from a different world. It's something that we share as human beings, right? And one of the things that we do share as human beings is implicit bias. But implicit bias towards trans community is what is the boot that's keeping us down, right? And sometimes we feed into it ourselves as community because we feel like, we made it to the mountaintop and I need it for me. I'm going to keep the secret. And it's just the reality of what happens in many oppressed communities. I think that the more we talk about it, the more that we can address it. And that only comes through, in particular, again, in this country, and I love that Maria Carmen referenced that, is financial literacy and wealth management is not something that especially trans people of color don't talk about. So everyone who's Black and brown and watching this, I don't stop being brown because I'm trans. I don't stop having implicit bias, not only as a trans woman, but as a plus size woman, but also as a Latina woman. Not to give this, whole laundry list of oppressions that I lived through, because I also live a magnificent. I live a magnificent life. I'm not complaining, but I'm saying that it does happen. I do walk into those, and I have to pick them apart. And I think that that's one of the things that, as a trans person, we have that je sais quoi, the tazón to kind of learn how to navigate, especially those that become apt at being able to navigate or code switch, then get the reward that's given. And the unfair part is then we leave brothers and sisters and siblings behind, right? So I think that's the bigger conversation, is this: how do we address implicit bias that is engendered into our community, even to the point that we hate ourselves?
Excellent. Great. Great, great, great. This one is kind of targeted towards you, Patricia, because it's talking about in the media. We're hearing a lot about these sports bills, and you spoke to it earlier, that are being pushed through at a state level, banning the trans kids, right? And youths from playing sports on a team that aligns with their true gender identity. So, what do you think about these bills? And I want everyone to answer long term versus short term, and the science behind the Olympics allowing trans athletes to compete, and then starting and stating that it's been proven scientifically that trans athletes on HRT do not have a competitive edge above cisgender athletes.
I'm guessing you want me to start this one off.
Yeah.
Well, it's a many layered question. First off, I want to clarify when I said in my previous statement, like, sports is important. I'm like, for me, it is. Like, it's very, very important. And I think it is actually very important. But I know certain people are very dismissive of sports. And I would challenge anyone that's really dismissive of sport of really understand what it means, not only to society at large, but especially to marginalized groups. I say this as a Black man in this country. Sports means so much because this was one of the few avenues where we were given access to speak and had power and even recognition, looking at, like, from Jack Johnson, who was just so unapologetically Black and very in white supremacist face, to a Joe Louis who was much quieter but became someone who represented the United States during the time of World War II. Like, all these things are incredibly, incredibly important, and understand that sports is more than just the game or the event itself. And what I'm seeing in particular, and what I keep pushing when I'm talking about this issue, is our opposition understands that they are losing the culture war. They understand that people are starting to recognize that trans people exist. This is huge news for people. Like, we exist everywhere. People are seeing us more often. We are getting the opportunities to voice more. We have always voiced, we've existed and deserve to be in spaces. But now, especially with social media, like, we have more control and there's more trans content creators. All these things are happening that we are much more visible, and people are having to contend with the fact that we're not going anywhere. They're using sports in particular to target because they understand that sports is a very unique place in this world where people of different race, people of different gender, people of different socioeconomic class come together with one specific goal. Now, whether they are the athlete themselves that are trying to participate and win, or if they are a fan watching it, you are united through sports. It has been used as a tool of unification within societies before. We've seen that with racial desegregation. Nelson Mandela used rugby during South Africa when the apartheid came down. Like, this is really powerful. And I can say for my own story, being in a space that's not thought of as being very trans inclusive, everyone that I've been around has had to contend with gender identities a lot more complex, because if they're recognizing me as a man and someone in the sport and someone who loves boxing, they have to realize, like, oh, I actually understand you. I may not understand your exact journey, but I understand that you love this sport and you want to compete. And that's a lot of the acceptance I've gotten in the community, is because people understand, at the end of the day, especially in boxing, the heart and the fact that this is a difficult sport. And they're concerned, and I'm using a big they because I'm just saying they as in the people who are trying to keep us out of the world and out of society, understand that sports will bring people in community and will bring a commonality. And they're really scared about that, because as soon as we put down our walls and realize that at the end of the day, despite all our differences, humans are actually very, very simple in terms of our wants and desires, and that we actually share these same things, understanding that they're going to be like, oh, whoa, they're going to see trans people as people. And we don't want that. And I think there's a lot of fear around, even if you're not trans, understanding that this world is not as binary as we've been led to believe. And that's scary. That is really scary. We've been told that there's one pathway. You are born a boy and you become a man. You're a boy and a girl and you become a woman, and that is it. And trans people are like, yeah, no, I don't agree with that. Like, I have choice in this matter, and I'm choosing to be myself. And they're using the rhetoric around science, and particularly women's sports and women's athletics in a way that is insulting that they are so misogynistic to distill athletes as only their physical capabilities and their physical components. And it's not just about, like, even this issue I could rant on for so long, and I've been on literally three other panels today discussing just how infuriating this is, but in particular that female athletics is only about what your physicality is. But we know with male athletes, Michael Jordan wasn't necessarily the most physically gifted athlete, and he is celebrated for that because of his drive and his dedication and discipline. And why do we think that female athletes don't also have that to rise above? And that trans women are basically being forced, trans girls and women, because this starts at kindergarten. Some of these bills literally start at kindergarten, are being forced to show that they are not a physical threat in order to have a right to compete. And we're going to see very soon with the Olympics, so now we have two trans athletes, trans women in particular, who will be competing, Laurel Hubbard of New Zealand and Chelsea Wolfe for the US for BMX. We're going to see what they're capable of, and understanding that once that seed is planted, that trans people realize they can go to the Olympics, we're going to see a lot more trans athletes coming about. And I, for one, am really excited to see us be on the biggest stage and see the kids who have understood for a long time, this is who I am, and had access to gender affirming care and be able to compete at the gender they wanted for a really long time, rather than having to transition and have to go through policy hoops that stall their careers. We're going to see that an athlete is way more than what they're physically born with. That an athlete is a whole human that has so many different components going on. And I'm excited for those stories to come out of just trans athletes being athletes in particular.
Amazing.
No, yeah, so I want to, that's a really great point that Patricia touched on about the sexism and patriarchal notions of sport, and that's what I want to touch on that. But if you want me to give some legal thought on this, I will also do that. But I just want to reiterate that like the whole thing about separating the binary genders into sports, they would. Let me step back a little. When you engage in critical thinking, you have to think that there's something underlying. There's an underlying thing here that is not in the surface, and you have to always interrogate and criticize that part. Don't just look at the surface, because they will tell you it's tradition that men and women, the binary genders, are separated in sports. But you have to think, if you're engaging in critical thinking, what's the underlying reason for that? And the underlying notion to that is something that Patricia highlighted, is this false thinking that women are inherently the weaker gender. This false generalization that all women has the biological curse of being physically weaker than men. And we know that is not true. I can tell you right now, Simone Biles will defeat several male gymnasts if gymnastics become like, a non-gendered event competition. It's just not true. So that whole thing is false. And the other thing that I want to touch on is about, this false notion or stereotype of trans people that is also underlying here. And they would say, they would say things like, we just want to protect trans people because they would be targeted, or we want to make sure that women are not disadvantaged, la la la. That's the surface discussion. What's underlying that is this whole false understanding that trans people are pretenders. And, we pretend to be the gender who we are in order to access certain things, which is like the weirdest thing I've ever heard in my life. Because I don't want to pretend to be like this just to be bullied and discriminated and harassed. I would have been like a really happy person, probably super rich now if I was a straight, cis, hetero person in this world. Why wouldn't I choose that, right? With given all the circumstances in our life today, but I can't because I would be living a lie. So I am not pretending. But the whole idea of like we will pretend to be women, for example, myself, in order to access sports so that we will have got gold medals and defeat women is just false. It's invalidating our gender identity. It's invalidating. It's rooted in transphobia and thinking that we are not real, right? Like it's the same thing that was used to like we are gonna pretend to be women so we can go in the women's bathroom and we can be peeping toms or we can assault women or girls, which is no. I go to the bathroom because I need to pee or I need to do my business, which is like my biological need to do stuff or to pee or to excrete, to go to the toilet. I don't have to like have this like sophisticated show of decades of my life just to pretend so I can get gold medal in sports and so I can get to the restroom and like assault women. That's not what trans people are. And if you go down a little there on the underlying part, you go dig more, it's victim blaming because who are the predators who would assault women or girls? Statistically, everyone can assault or attack anyone. But statistically, it's male. Men in our society commit gender-based violence. But women are being blamed for the violence that they suffer. Trans people are also being blamed for the violence they suffer. And the consequence is our rights are being diminished. And they will tell us it's for your own good. We're doing it for your own good. We're doing all this law that basically turn you into second-class citizens for your own good. So that's the aspect I want to talk. And I can talk about the legal aspect of all these trans issues in sports later if you want me to. But I just want to touch on some of those really fundamental, patriarchal, sexist, misogynist underpinning of the world that this whole conversation revolves.
Excellent. Thank you, Maria Carmen. Queen Victoria?
Yes, well now, I'm probably not going to be as eloquent as my fellow panelists, and you'll get acquainted right now with not Queen Victoria, but La Vicky from East LA.
Okay.
I'm just going to say, like, I don't know much about sports. Of course, the fat girl's not going to know that much about sports. It's not my thing. But, one of the things that I think is happening is some bitches are jaded. Let's just call it what it is. If people of trans experience are succeeding, people want to keep it down. And all I gotta say is you could kiss my brown trans ass because we are here not going anywhere, and that's what's happening. To me, it boils down to you're afraid we're gonna snatch some wigs, we're gonna gather your edges, and part of sports and anything in the game of life requires having strength, mental strength, having the ability to say, I am here, I'm gonna stick through it. And if you see and live the life of the trans person, you better motherfucking believe we have been through some shit. Sorry, I'm cursing, but you're getting La Vicky today. Is that it has prepared us in the mental strength and discipline needed to get to the finish line, pun intended, right? And in that sense, I think that people are put off by that. But the reality is, that's what we're doing, and that's how we're thriving, and we're not going to stop just because some people are bothered.
I love it. I often feel that people are afraid that they're not going to be able to articulate or comprehend or understand or be able to translate to so-called their children and other people, but they're having those conversations regardless. The children are having those conversations on their own. So people are getting caught up in these, as you all said so eloquently, these false narratives of who we are. And, we're going to continue being who we are. And with that being said, how can city government do more to advance trans equity? Trans people in housing, accessing services, what kind of policy change at the local level do you think would be most helpful for trans people? Start with you, Maria.
Oh, that's a politician answer. And I used to be a politician when I was running for student elections, but I'm not a politician now. I mean, there's so much things that governments are doing. Santa Monica is definitely up there. I know West Hollywood is really leading the way on how to make the city very inclusive. And I know LA and the LA County in general is doing some intentional work on this aspect. Of course, there's always more work to do. And a lot of it is equity and inclusion work, but I just want to say something about that because I think there's just a fundamental disconnect. So having policies in place, having a lot of like statements on your website or like, documents or, memorandums or what do you call them, city council when they have a thing, ordinances of like, we support trans community. Those are nice. Having flags flown. Those are nice symbolic gestures, and it does help because I remember as a young person when I was looking for places where I feel safe, I would look at the flags, and when I see the rainbow flag, I have, a sense of psychological safety. That's important. But I think putting that aside, there needs to be, and I'm going to go back to what Victoria and I were like pointing earlier, there needs to be some real effort to bring in the trans community into the fold, into the decision-making process, into the leadership, into the power structure. There is no way that an outsider can make that fix. It has to be someone like us, someone, not me probably, someone who is in the community, someone who has all these experiences, someone who was impacted, someone who has the lived experience of these problems that, governments are trying to solve. And it's nice to know that, a lot of the people who organize and are members of our community, and I commend to Monica for that. But there should be more. There should be more trans and non-binary people in government. They should hire us. And when I say us, they should hire the most impacted, right? Trans people of color, especially Black trans people, and specifically Black trans women, when he was experiencing a lot of like the violence and like the exclusion in a lot of this economic opportunities that in our society. So I think if there is really one thing that I want to impart that government can do is like you really need to our community. It's nice when you bring us to like advisory council. We get to advise, but it's really different if we are the one doing the work. You will see that. It comes naturally, it's really organic, like we just go to the job, do our thing, and things will just change. That's just how it is. It cannot be done by an outsider. It cannot be done from the outside looking in. It has to be from the inside, from the community. That's what I wanna say to that. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Maria. Green and Victoria.
So I'm gonna echo everything that was said by Maria Carmen, but I would add just specifically, like to think outside the box. We don't always have to be hired just for a specific position. We can, or it has to be a trans-identified position. We could play any role. We can play supervisory roles. We can be consultants because we have levels of expertise. So if government starts thinking from that perspective, then we could reach that as well. Specifically around housing, I think that one of the things that people should know is definitely transitional and permanent housing are going to be the things that are needed to address the Maslow's hierarchy of need that we just addressed, right? We need a place to be able to heal from the trauma, right? To be able to not be in fight or flight, but to be in a process of actually healing where we can actually be have our head above water. We're not just, trying to swim through. The other of accessing services, you have to create a space where not only do you show the affirming symbols like the trans flag, the trans size, the non-binary flag, the all-inclusive flag, but also hiring people behind the desk and that are part of the decision-making process to build out those services of that systems navigation. So from name and gender change to addressing violence to addressing, housing, and so on and so forth. The number one policy that I would recommend for governments to institute is to look at affirmative action throughout their programming. Some people are going to poo-poo it or might say it's something antiquated, but the reality is that affirmative action is affirmative action with teeth, not just the policy, but an oversight committee that ensures that affirmative action is taking place throughout the multitude of services that are offered and funded through the county, or funded through the city, I'm sorry. Because one of the things is that we also we're never asked, are you trans when you pay taxes, and then suddenly told, don't pay them. We pay taxes. Every time I buy a soda, every time, I get pulled over by a cop and pay my ticket, or, I get a parking ticket, we're paying them. We are citizens that are putting our money back into these cities, and these cities are not responding to our needs. The implicit bias, it runs deep. So I think that affirmative action is the way to go. That's the number one policy I would recommend.
Thank you. Patricio, Pat.
Well, I think I have less to add than my other two previous panelists, because I'm less on the policy and that type of level. I'm a boxer, but I will say from just my own experience as actually a city employee, I work for the city of Duarte and the teen center as a boxing coach. And this is also the gym that I train at. I do think there is, to echo what has been said before, like when trans people are in spaces, and I'm not in a position of necessarily leadership within the city, but just the fact that I am a hired employee, like I am a trans person who happens to work there. It's really important just because these cities are the community. These are the communities we're a part of. And just by being who we are, we end up impacting individuals. And I in particular work with kids. This is the teen center. I work with anywhere from up until adults, but these kids know I'm trans. They know social media. They're very into the fact that I have a little bit more of a social media presence than other people. It's actually very odd to be the cool one in the gym. I never thought I would experience that in my life, but these teenagers and little kids actually respond super well to the fact that they're like, oh, I like you. I respect you. You're a human. You're trans. Okay. It's really not that big of a deal for them. And, for me, that's really hopeful for the future because these kids are now being impacted, even if it's in a small way, by understanding like, oh, this trans person isn't just some image or caricature that I see represented in a TV show, often not written or even played by a trans person, but this is a real life person that I have some sort of relationship with. And I think this will cause ripple effects within the community and hopefully get people to think about in all spaces. There isn't any facet of government or life in general where we shouldn't be examining like, why are there not trans people here? Are trans people not being served properly? Are trans needs not being prioritized because we know they're the most marginalized group if we're going to have a large group of people? And, for me, I'm much more involved in the cultural change work. And I think as we change the culture, we're going to see the policy and the government also be impacted too.
Can I just add, Jasmine, because when I was encouraging like hiring of trans people, I mean that in the general sense. So I think including private sector. So I think what the city, like our county, like Santa Monica, can do is incentivize businesses within their locality on hiring trans people. And I know I'm not a politician. I don't know how that's going to happen. Is that a tax break? Is that some kind of like, you get some kind of thing with the city or the county, you get some funding. I don't know how that can be done. That's the work of politician, and you all were elected for that, so that's your job. But I know that can be done. And that has been done in many places. Mm-hmm. So if you can incentivize those businesses in your area, those restaurants, those banks, those all kinds of businesses, and really train these businesses also on how to retain trans people by not being horrible to them, that's going to be a big help.
I'm right there with you, Maria. I keep my whole platform is I really want folks, even if the individual doesn't know how to do the job or has no background, no experience, do paid internship, right? Give them a paid internship where they can learn how to do it for 90 days or, until they figure out, is this what I want to do? Right? And so they can get some grasp around it. But maybe you can't put them in right at the level, they desire to go in, but at least give them the opportunity to have them thinking, this is truly a possibility for me. And that I want to go back to what Queen Victoria was saying, the bridge housing and emergency housing is very important because not only a chance to rest, but a chance to choose different thoughts about who you are in your life. Because again, when we're in flight and fight mode, that's all we're thinking about. We're just in survival mode. So all that is important. But at the end of the day, everyone needs an opportunity to have free will and free choice as to who they are and how they want to live their lives and how they want to, excel in life. And that brings me again. I want to know how, what are people's individual responsibility in advancing trans equity? Queen Victoria.
I'm gonna do it in a three. House, hire, and love trans people. I think that is the 3 points that I would say. If you really think about it, it's again, I don't want to reiterate what already has been said, but in housing people, it really changes lives. Hiring people gives them also the opportunity in the background, as was mentioned, even if it's a brief moment, it gives them a history to be able to put on their resume as well. And then loving people, when you love people like those kids that Patricio gets to shape in his interaction, you change the world. That's what that powerful feeling that we have for your own individual family, your own children, the own people that in your lives that you care about. We deserve it too.
Thank you. Patricio?
Yeah, I think, there's so many responsibilities, but I think the root of it is really understanding, and this is broader than just a trans issue. This is just a human issue, but if we're speaking of specifically marginalized identities and identities that may not reflect our own, is that we have to care even when it doesn't impact us. We need to care when there is an issue that impacts someone that doesn't look like us, that doesn't act like us, that we don't understand anything about that person. We have no relationship. We have to care. We have to understand that as humans, we are a collective society. We are a collective group. I need to care about the issues, even if they don't impact my daily life. And other people need to care about the issues that impact me. And especially as we're in this age of globalization is super easy. I've been on this is my 4th panel today, talking to people, some people in different countries. This is easier now than ever to form a broader community. So that means everyone needs to care about the issues of other people when they're impacting their health, their livelihood, they're impacting their ability to just be their full selves. Like this is an issue for all of us. Trans issues are human issues because we're a part of the society, and we need people to care about us because we are them as well.
Excellent. Maria Carmen?
I really like Victoria's slogan, house, hire, and love trans people. That is beautiful. I'm gonna add trust trans people, believe trans people. When we say who we are not lying to you. When I tell you I'm a woman, I'm not lying to you. Not lying to you to get to that bathroom and do crazy shit. I'm not lying to you so I can get the gold medal in the whatever sports that is. I don't play sports. I used to play fencing and I'm pretty good at it. Believe us, trust us. When we go to that job application with a resume, believe us, trust us, invest in us. A lot of the implicit bias that Vicky was talking about a lot, it puts us into a position where we are being put in so much scrutiny, right? Like just to get the job, like they make us jump hoops, or like just to get that housing, or just to get that, like, that health care, or and the root cause of that is because they don't believe us. They think we are, again, this whole false notion that trans people are pretenders. We are living this life, and we're just, trust us, believe us. We know who we are. We know what we need. We know what we can do. We are part of this country. We are part of this world. Now that's Little Mermaid. We are part of your community. We are not just your lawyers, your doctors. We are your neighbors. We are humans like you, and just live. We need to do it. Like, we have no choice. We have to live, and we have to respect each other.
Excellent. Let me ask, what are some of the best ways that people supported you when you began transitioning? And conversely, what are some of the well-intentioned ways that you've seen people respond to trans people coming out that didn't end up being helpful? Patricia, let's start with you.
I mean, I feel very, very fortunate. I'm like, there's actually a lot of ways that people have supported me and have been very helpful. And I feel like that's a real blessing that I'm like, how do I narrow it down? My family was supportive of me straight off the bat. Like, I didn't have to worry, and this shouldn't be a rarity, but I didn't have to worry about being disowned or discarded from my family, because I was like, this is who I am and this is how I want to live my life. That even when there were people that walked out of my life, including me losing my gym and my team, I got another gym and team. Other people have stepped up. For every time that there has been one person that removed themselves from my life, 10 more have come to support me, just because I'm living my truth. And I think there is something really powerful about trans people, and despite all of the obstacles, and it's infuriating that it's still, and we're all talking here being like, hey, we're human. We deserve to be treated like a human. So to just be like, this is who I am, and it matters so much that I'm really willing to risk my life, because that is the reality, is that we are risking our lives in order to say, this is who I am, and I cannot live a lie. I do think that there are people responding to the fact that they're seeing authenticity, because in this world, it is seen as a courageous act to be true to yourself. We don't live in a world of authenticity. So, I have had a lot of support in my boxing team. I've had sparring partners, other gyms. The fact that I was on a Golden Promotion card was because Eric Gomez, the president of Golden Boy Promotions, read my story and was like, you deserve a chance. Like, these are all huge ways that people stepped up and really helped me. And in terms of well-intentioned things that weren't necessarily the best, maybe because this is a fresh in mind, I'm just thinking about, often media can be very well-intentioned, but because there are not enough trans people telling trans stories, because there are not enough trans people in the newsroom, there's a lot of harm that ends up happening when people are trying to share our stories. That there's a re-traumatization, asking over and over about things that happened to us, dead naming us when it's completely unnecessary. So I do think that there are some of the media, there's definitely a lot of really, really ill-intentioned media out there, particularly around trans athletes in this moment. But I think even when people are trying to do their best, they're not willing to say, I actually don't know the best way to handle it. And they don't seek out further help in order to manage a story with care, and not really fully understanding that doing the things that they think is the right way may actually cause a lot of harm to trans people.
Thank you. Queen Victoria?
Ironically, for this question, because one of the parts is, what are some of the best ways people have supported you when you began transition? I looked off to the side because I have a special guest. Come here. This is my sister, Princess Beatrice. So one of the best ways is loving people unconditionally, and that's what she did for me. So I just wanted to say thank you, and I'm glad that she dropped by just by happenstance. But I think that's one of the major ways, is showing up for people, whether you're there as a friend or as a family member. I know that my sister did that for me, and I love you for that. So thank you. And so that's the way that you do it, is showing up for people and believing in them, as was mentioned by Maria Carmen. Is that belief and having that support is going to allow us as trans people to thrive. And I think some of the things that happen that are well-intentioned is asking questions about our bodies and our sex practices are like, you don't do that. I mean, we talk about everything, but you know, it's like because I divulge, not necessarily having questions. But yeah, I just wanted to, just in case you saw me looking to the side, my sister got by, so I just wanted to, it just happened to be with the question too. So
hey, it was nice meeting you guys, and you guys are doing a good job. And I am very proud of my sister, and I hear what you guys are talking about, and you got all my support.
Thank you.
you go go now.
Okay. Bye.
Bye, sister.
Maria Carmen, you want to add to that to the conversation?
Oh, sure. I mean, I have 10 million stories about allyship, and then people who thought they were allies, but they're actually doing more harm. What I want to highlight, I guess I could highlight one thing which could happen every day is, for me personally, I really appreciate when people don't make a big deal of my being trans or just my gender identity. Like, treat it as a non-issue, and just like we're just normal. It's like a normal thing. And what I mean about that is, like, sometimes people will talk to me and they, for example, would misgender me, and I would correct them, right? Like, oh yeah, my pronoun is her. I identify as a woman. It really feels good if you just say things like, oh, thank you for correcting me, Maria, I'm Carmen. And then that's it. You know, address me as a woman. And then it will become weird when you just like become like, oh, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to. I'm not transphobic. Oh, I went to this training. And then you just turn it into this really big deal. And it happens to me a lot at work sometimes, in many things that, you know, different work things that I did in my life. And now it puts me in a spot, and what to me was not a big deal because I'm very understanding and people will make mistakes, becomes like this thing, and now I feel really awkward and unwelcome in the space. So, you know, try to just not make a big deal of things sometimes. If you want to be an ally, don't be over showy. Don't do the whole like performance. Like, just be real, be plain, and just be natural. You can make mistakes. That's fine. Trans people are actually very forgiving. At least I know all the trans people I know are very forgiving, very open-minded, you know, and they will not make a big deal if you just like be honest about it and like apologize and then move on.
This is good. That was my next question. We were going to talk about allyship and what would be the best ally for the trans community to be doing with, you know, as an ally. Does anyone want to speak to any more or that? Or I think we got it. Did we got it? Did we get it? You got it? Cool.
So I think we got it. It's the higher house of love. Higher house, love, believe, trust us. We are here.
So what legal battles have you seen result in a positive outcome for the trans community on local level, state level, and nationally? Maria Carmen?
Yeah. I have a feeling you will call me on this. This is actually another trap question because there are so many legal battles. I mean, I would just say that the most recent decision in the case of Bostock, which is, you know, the recent Supreme Court decision that says that discrimination based on sexual orientation and discrimination based on gender identity is considered sex discrimination and therefore covered.
We lost Maria. We're going to come back to her. Queen, can you speak on this?
Yes, definitely. Thank you. I think that one of the things that happens is that because of the life that we live and the erasure that happens, when people don't kind of want to deal with the fact that trans people actually are warriors, if you think about it, we're the ones that are oftentimes at the forefront of legal battles. So there's been a legal battle, for example, at ATS, There's been a legal battle for marriage equality that were led and was part of of being able to acquire marriage equality. Was a trans woman actually was part of a legal battle that was married to her partner. We have had legal battles around bathroom access that trans people have fought for. We've had legal battles around just gender equality in the sense of the workforce. So we've been present at those things, but we don't get the headlines. We don't look the part per se at times. People don't want to read about us. We're not a child. We're considered a throwaway community. So then that affects how people value and respect the legal precedence that has been established by trans people. But trans people have opened the doors for so many people from the beginning of Stonewall to marriage equality. And I just got to say, for all my LGBT brothers and sisters, and we're celebrating Pride, you're welcome. We continue to break down barriers. That's what we do. So there's not only national legislation, legal ordinances like in the city of West Hollywood around hate speech, was because of trans people. So if you're ever in West Hollywood and somebody calls you some sort of LGBT slur, it was because trans people fought for that. And you're able to say, that person called me this, and that's not allowed in this city because it's ours. So I really think that we need to pay homage to the pioneers, the trans pioneers that have done that. And I think that that's the major point to think about. If you really look at legislation, if you really pay attention to a lot of the major legal battles that have happened, particularly in the LGBT community, the imagery, including Pride, the number one images that are projected out there are of people of trans experience.
Maria, did you want to finish?
Yes, I'm sorry. I had some technical difficulties there. I was talking about specifically the case of Bostock, where the Supreme Court said that discrimination based on gender identity and sexual orientation is, by definition, discrimination based on sex. That's very huge. And you know that the case is known as Bostock because it's the case of the gay employee. But actually, within that case is the more important case. You know, the important case of Amy Stephens. Amy Stephens is a transgender woman. She's no longer with us. Sadly, before the case was decided, she passed. But she was an employee of a funeral home. She transitioned at work. She started wearing, female clothing, which was based on her gender identity, and she was fired. And so she sued, and that's part of that case. And the Supreme Court said you can't do that because you are discriminating on her because she's trans, but you're also discriminating on her because of your stereotyping of gender, right? Like just because you think someone is born assigned as male, then they shouldn't have to wear male clothing if they want to wear female clothing. So that's a consequential case because it has consequence in Title IX. And what is Title IX? Title IX is the federal law that regulates, educational institutions. Every educational institution that receives funding from the federal government is prohibited from discriminating based on sex. And that means all services and programs, including athletics and sports. So that's a very important thing because if discrimination against trans people is sex discrimination under Title VII, then a legal argument can be made that it's also sex discrimination under Title IX because you can't interpret laws differently. You will confuse people. And then that will open the door to the conclusion that students who are trans should not be excluded from sports and athletic activities, based on their gender identity and expression. And that's exactly what this administration has done. It reversed Trump policy saying that trans people are not protected under Title IX. And it announced that it will change the guidance in the Department of Education saying that trans people are actually protected by Title IX and cannot be excluded or discriminated on school educational activities, including sports and athletics and bathrooms and all of that.
Thank you. Patricio? Thank you.
I mean, I wouldn't have had that much to add just if I followed Queen Victoria, but especially following Maria Carmen and the lawyer, I have a lot less to add to that. I do small victories for me was with all these anti-trans sports bills that are rolling out, and especially as like West Virginia made a big to do about passing a policy when they literally don't know if there are any trans kid athletes even there. Seeing, I think it was North Carolina and Louisiana drop their bills because it was not an issue, like specifically saying it's not an issue. Which I think literally all these bills should be doing that. These are non-issues that people are wasting valuable time and resources for. So I hope that we continue to see more people just realizing like this is unimportant. Like this is literally not an issue that we're having. There still hasn't been any indication or issue that not only are trans people like not cheating because they're just existing, but there's not even a critical mass number of trans athletes at this point to even make this policy or even any argument in actual reality. So I'm just hoping that that was a start, and we'll see more of these bills just being dropped.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Healthcare, like what sort of issues navigating, systems exist for trans individuals, but are largely unknown to straight people and even LGBT people. Queen Victoria, can you speak to that?
So I say that from the perspective of that I helped build out one of the largest healthcare centers here for trans people called St. John's Welltown. So some of the things that are unknown to y'all out there that are of sixth experience is you have to change your name and gender. So there's a lot of things that'll take another hour, so I'll do the short ones. You have to change your name and gender just for your medical card, your insurance card, so that's one issue. That's already one hurdle. So if you haven't done that, I'll give you an example. If you show up, you're a trans person, you haven't changed your name and gender. Say, for example, my name was whatever, Juan Paulo, for example. I show up, I say my affirmed name is Queen Victoria. I'm given hormones right away, then my insurance will then deny my hormones because they're like, why are you giving a biological male hormones? Okay, we fix that. We explain I'm trans. Then the other hurdle is, okay, we explained that I'm trans. They have to believe you, going to Maria Carmen's point. First, they have to believe you. So then they believe you. Then they issue the hormones again. Then again, it's denied because they're giving a woman under 50 who's premenopausal hormones. So then you have to explain again so they believe you that you're trans, and you have to send out these other prior authorizations. That's just to get hormones. That doesn't include going to the emergency room. For example, myself, I've been charged 3 times at the emergency room for a pregnancy test. I'm just plus size. I just like a burrito, a taco or two. I am not pregnant, I guarantee. It's not happening. If it is, I'm going to be a rich woman. But there's no need. I say to the medical provider, I am a trans woman. No need for a pregnancy test. The motherfucking bill still comes to my house. So those are just a few examples. That does not include navigating gender-affirming surgeries, mental health therapy, where it's always this kind of chasing the carrot of trying to get somebody who doesn't know shit about being a trans person say, okay, I believe you enough, you're trans enough, now let me give you a letter so you could go and be who you are. Mm-hmm. That's just a brief example, and that's me on a happy day. But yeah, there's a list. But yeah.
Thank you, Queen. Maria Carmen?
I'm going to try and be short, but I'm not sure if what I'm going to say is responsive to the question. I think what I want to contribute to this conversation is personally for me, like the dilemma I'm always having about, having a medical diagnosis for my being trans, right? And how that's a double-edged sword for me. And I have a lot of friends in the community and they feel the same way, right? Like, on one hand, it provides safety for me, ability for me to transition and be who I am and have access to health care, access to, transition affirming, treatments. And it just provided justification for my rights, human rights, that like, this is who I am, this is part of me biologically, this is who, my something in my body. On the other hand, it feels really weird and awkward and odd to be that my whole humanity, I sometimes I feel like my whole humanity is based on a medical diagnosis, or this thing that I have that is considered like some kind of disorder or a disease in some places. Um, to feel like it's reduced to that. At the end of the day, this is a medical condition that I have to cure or treat, or I have to constantly go to hospital or get the medication and stuff like that. So I think that's what I want to share, and it does affect how I access healthcare, because I don't usually go to my appointments. For example, it's based on my feeling, whether I feel weird or I feel comfortable or I feel safe. When I go to ER, I'm like, oh gosh, like Victoria was saying, like, how much am I gonna say? How much of the tea I'm gonna
Yeah.
say?
Oh, Maria Carmen. She's gonna come back. Patricio, can you speak to PTSD, trauma around the medical care?
Oh, I mean, I feel like, is there a trans person that hasn't experienced that as a result of medical care, which is so incredibly unfortunate given that we literally have to interact with it, not only for like just general well-being, but even to access gender affirming care means we have to get these diagnoses, and we do get distilled down into literally like, yeah, being like seeing it written on your like list of health complications or things like that. It's like transgender, or I'll say like transgenderism, or depending on how progressive they are, transgenderism, transsexual, female to male, and I'm like, are we still going through this? It's especially like a double whammy, right? Especially when you're Black, of like having to navigate the implicit bias of being Black. Like we're seen as not literally feeling pain. Like this is still an issue within the medical community. And then you have to deal with the transphobia that you experience from doctors. And I'm a part of UCLA Healthcare, which has actually a pretty good trans healthcare, and I have some really great trans affirming doctors. I've also had to experience doctors who asked, oh, you actually are able to box against men? Like telling me things like this, like that I'm like, we keep going back to that. We're lying, right? That I'm like, oh, I'm making this up. I'm like, Google me. And I'm like, it shouldn't even matter if I'm winning or not, but I actually am beating dudes. Like, this isn't an issue. And, this is the concern of like, how much do you disclose in an emergency situation? It was definitely a big fear in the conversations among, especially BIPOC trans folks during COVID of like, oh, if we go into hospitals, we're most likely not coming out. Like that is the reality, is that we will not get the care, because whether someone's saying I'm transphobic or not, they are more than likely to have an implicit bias that they're not going to care about us as much. The medical industrial industry is killing us. It is not giving us enough care. It is making gatekeeping really difficult. And we have to constantly wonder if the person that we are entrusting our body and our life to is actually doesn't want to see us live.
Oh. Maria Carmen, you're back. We were talking about.
Thank you. I think I said what I said, and
Patricia
okay. kind of touch on it too. Like, really weird place.
Awesome.
The healthcare system and the medical, infrastructure is a weird place for a trans person, at least in my experience.
Can we go to homelessness in the trans community and housing access, reasons that lead to a disproportionate number of our community experiencing homelessness? And what do we think could be done about it? Let's start with you, Patricio.
I am probably the least qualified person to answer this on the panel currently. I think, we're dealing with the fact, like, especially in LA, homelessness is a huge issue. We see specifically the most vulnerable populations being pushed out of their housing. If you're not going to have access to jobs, you're not going to be able to pay these very expensive bills in order to get housing, and even just trying to get on a lease when your credit report comes back. If you were able to change your name legally, which a lot of people aren't able to, you come up as a credit risk. It beeps up. Trying to establish credit enough and able to even get enough that a landlord will risk you. I think most of them are like, 640, 620, which is hard, especially when you don't have a job and you're broke. Like, all these things make it very difficult for trans people to have housing. And then you throw in the fact that kids are literally thrown out of their houses by their parents because they came out as trans. Like, to not see that housing and homelessness is really such a huge, and as Queen Victoria has been saying over and over, such a huge issue. And even the care of services for houseless people, are those people being trained properly, having to navigate transphobia within those spaces? There's just so much stacked against trans people once they lose access to housing, of like, how do you get back under a roof? Like, they make it incredibly difficult.
Queen Victoria?
I think that both for medical field, all social determinants of health, really, to be honest, of how they are compounded and how it affects the trans community, particularly homelessness, is the valuation of life, of the life of trans people. We see it in the murders of trans community, that they make a bleep on the radar. We see it when we have that fear of COVID-19 that was mentioned by Patricio. If we went to the hospital, our cities don't even plan for emergency response. They'll stockpile heart disease medication, diabetes medication, not necessarily hormones, because they don't see it as an emergency, for example. The valuation of trans life is zero. When you don't see trans people as human beings, you don't value their life. Therefore, when there's an opportunity for a job, you're going to give it to somebody who you think has to support a family. We're not seen as people who also have children, have families, or people who care about us. So that sends a message to parents also that if you have a trans kid, then that they're deficient or defective, therefore dismissed, and not bringing value to the family. They're not going to take on the name. That then extends to how housing is and housing applications take place. We're not considered investable. Why are you going to invest or grant a loan for someone of trans experience to buy the house if, one, they're not going to have a family again? They're also just not going to have a successful future or a successful job. And that's the narrative that is being created, is trans people have no value. So therefore, why create houses or jobs or even take them into consideration? But is that the truth, right? Consider that, right? Leave with that question. That then breeds stereotypes and implicit bias that are not necessarily untrue. What I mean by, you think that trans people are all sex workers, or which a large majority of us do have to engage in survival sex work. That trans people are not going to have families, and some of us are not. Me particularly, I hate kids. I can't do it. I love that Patricio does the work because I can't stand the damn little rugrats. However, that's the stereotype that is created. Is there some truth to it? Yes, but not all the information is there. Pile on top of that we are also part of other communities that are intersection and not valued. If you look at homelessness, the majority are Black people. Black and brown people that are living in homelessness, that are cis. Therefore, if you're a Black or brown trans person, guess what? Therefore, you have even less value, at a deficit, at a negative. So that is the narrative that has been welcomed into our society. And that is what we're trying to do today, is reestablish or rewrite that narrative, address the implicit bias, and really challenge cities and policymakers to engage in affirmative action so that we are hired, housed, and loved, and trusted and believed, as was mentioned by Maria Carmen.
Excellent. Thank you, Victoria. Maria Carmen?
I apologize again. If I swear I got the vaccine, so I should have the 5G, right? but obviously my 5G microchip is not working. And joke. Um, all of that, I just want to say all of that Patricia and Victoria said. But again, I'm going to engage again in this critical thinking of like, what is the underlying thing about homelessness, about unemployment? For me, it's this myth, right? This myth, capitalism myth of scarcity. It's not real. There is no scarcity. We are conditioned to think like there's scarcity of food and we should fight for food. We should like fight each other for food. There is not scarcity of food. If we only know how much food we waste every year, we will be like all like feeling guilty about how we live because there is no such thing as scarcity. They say there's scarcity of homes. There is no such thing. I mean, I live in the Bay Area. I see all these buildings around me that has empty apartments, houses that are empty. And in LA, right, there's so many, there's no such thing as scarcity. What we have, and that's a myth, right? What we have is the lack of care to our fellow human beings because we were conditioned to fight and compete against each other. And I think that's, if we just, again, going back to like how as we individuals can like help the trans community. And this is just generally as a human race, like we need to actually go and unlearn a lot of the stuff that was conditioned in our brains, such as like, we have to always compete. There's always scarcity. So we always have to like fight each other or like, I suffered. So I want you to suffer too, right? We hear this with like the generation, I think they're called the boomers. I pretend that I don't know. Like you hear them sometimes say like, why would we have free college? We paid for our college. We paid for our healthcare, so why are we going to have universal free healthcare? If you look at that statement, it's just so cruel because just because you suffered, you want the next generation to suffer as well. I think we need to stop thinking like that. And this is how, my mom always tells me, I work so hard, I sacrifice so much so that you and your sister will have a good life. And I think that's how we need to think about as human beings, as people. Like, I want to make sure that the generation of trans people after me, the younger trans, will not have to do the things that I did just to survive and to be successful. I mean, I'm proud of my journey and I'm happy about the experience, but I want to make life easier for them. Right? And I think that's what, when we think about homelessness, it's just really about how intentional we are about not being, not treating other human beings as crap and really just unlocking all these resources that are just sitting around. There is no scarcity for homes. There's homes for everyone. It's just really like we need to like unlearn a lot of that.
So I want to adhere to all these questions. So this next question seems like it's coming out of left field, but it's important to the conversation. And we've kind of touched on it a little bit, but I'm gonna have to read this question to you. It says, "What have your personal life lived experience, been navigating bathrooms? What would be most helpful changes to create less fear for trans people navigating bathrooms?" It says, can you talk to your personal experience and, what can be done to change make bathrooms less dangerous for trans people? And what falsehoods have fueled this narrative that results in bathroom bills like the ones we've seen in many state schools and, et cetera. Victoria?
Well, I think my biggest I think my biggest fear, while being a woman going to the bathroom, is the fucking line. I'm just like, it's the line. Apart from that, I think that when I've witnessed and when I've experienced, I was at the gym. Believe it or not, it was a long time ago. I was at the gym and I was actually asked to not go to the women's dressing room because I was a man. I experienced it at a dressing room in Forever 21, which is not necessarily a bathroom, but then I was walked over to a maintenance closet. That's where I was supposed to try on clothes. That was their attempt at accommodating me among the mops and the brooms. So that's been some of my experiences. I think that the discussion around bathrooms is cultural, right? Because if you go through other cultures, it's a place you go and take care of what everybody else goes to take care of. A fart smells. Let me just tell you that right now, it smells. No matter who you are, welcome to humanity. People pee and do other things. So those are, I think, some of the things that are so important, and I'm just amazed that we're still talking about them, because I actually am writing a small book called I Just Want to Pee, because it's always been the discussion as a professional. My biggest trauma has been in the professional sector. Luckily enough, I had the road paved by a lot of wonderful trans activists, and I was able to create a niche career in working with trans community now for 26 years. So in doing so, the biggest concern is, where was I going to go pee? That was the discussion of every human resource director that I encountered, whether it was the LGBT center, whether it was, St. John, it was where was I going to go pee? Just think about that is an actual discussion that people were having. For me, it's a little bit triggering. So sorry that I went in a little rant, but yeah, people, it's a bathroom. You have a gender neutral bathroom at your home.
Patricia, thank you, Queen.
Yeah, to echo what Queen Victoria said, like, how are we still, like, why is this still a point of contention? Bathrooms are a little bit different for me. It's interesting, before I medically transitioned, or even before I started claiming my identity as a man, I dealt with harassment in bathrooms because I was viewed as too masculine to be in those spaces. And, often I would use humor to try to shame the person back immediately around these type of things, to get them to be like, I'm fine here. I need to be in this space. Where would you like me to go to the bathroom? I won't go into like my various tactics of it, but it worked pretty well using shame in it. But it really leads to the question of, like, I don't understand why, and I'm going to use this term broadly, more women aren't realizing that even their own bodies are being policed in these spaces. Even women who identify as women but are masculine are policed regularly. This is not, you ask any old school butch, like, they will tell you a story about, like, saying, like, yes, these are boobs, yes, I get to be in this space. Like, this is a constant regulation over particularly women's bodies. I go into the men's restroom and it's disgusting. And sometimes it's annoying that I have to wait for an actual stall because there's only a urinal, but no one bothers me there. And there's this constant fear, right? That, like, if someone who's not supposed to go into the women's restroom, aka anyone who is identified as a man, whether that's correct or not, is gonna rape a woman, then the issue isn't who is in the women's bathroom. The issue is we need to stop raping people. Like, we are focusing on the wrong issue and not acknowledging that, trans people, gender nonconforming people, non-binary people, whatever term you want to use, also get harmed in these spaces, also get harmed in bathrooms. And, like, when we are forcing people into bathrooms where they're telling you is unsafe for them, you are putting them in harm's way. So basically you're saying, who are we prioritizing in this safety? And I would challenge so many of these women that, clutch their pearls about who are in the bathroom with them, that if your concern is that a man will come in and rape you, then you need to go speak to men and be like, hey, don't come in the restroom and harm us here. This has now become an issue that it is removing the actual burden of blame for the people who are causing the harm. And yes, I know that anyone can rape or harm another person. I don't want to say specifically that women aren't capable of doing that to other women, because that is true. But specifically with this issue, it gets used that, the fear that a man will come in this space and do this. Then your issue is with telling men to stop raping, not saying that people can't just go to the bathroom in peace.
Excellent. Thank you. Maria Carmen?
That's what I was trying to say earlier. Thank you, Patricia. Thank you, Victoria. That's how patriarchy works. They gaslight us, they victim blame us, and they tell us that we're doing it for your own safety. Right? Like their whole idea of like we want to protect women who are vulnerable from being raped or assaulted. And so we're gonna like totally invalidate a whole subset of women in order to protect women. So they're just pitting us against each other. But in reality, we have to look at who is raping.
Oh, Maria, not again.
Oh, again.
There you are. You're back. You're back.
So you always have to step back and look at it from, I'm back, I'm gone.
Oh, no. Oh, she's gone again. Oh, no. We'll get her back.
I'm gone?
Oh, no, you're back. You're back. You're back. You're with us.
Anyways, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I mean, I guess I don't have to belabor that thought, but I just want to share a recent experience I had going to Tennessee. I'm not the person who would want to go to Tennessee for a vacation, but I have to go because there's a family vacation of my fiance, and I have to go. But and Tennessee is one of those states, if you don't know, that has those harsh anti-trans legislation and bathrooms and all that stuff. But I had to be brave because it's my fiance and his family. And all the time that I was there, I was in fear that I'm going to be found out that I'm trans. And I literally held my pee when I'm outside and wait for us to get back to the hotel or where we're staying because of that. And if I couldn't hold it for some reason, I go in a women's restroom, but I don't even talk, and I keep my head down because I don't want them to find me out. I remember, like, a white woman was engaging to me, like, "Hi, you."
Oh, we lost Maria again. I have to get ready to wrap this up, but I want to thank you all, for your time, your energy, your love and support. Any last words? Any parting words you want to leave us with? Queen Victoria.
Just house, hire, and love trans people and believe them, trust them. That's it.
Thank you. Patricio?
Oh, sorry. And pay us. Sorry, I forgot that.
Yeah.
Yes, pay us. That is definitely something that is necessary. I think especially as I am rounding out like the end of my day of being on panels, I'm very grateful for these spaces and the fact that trans issues are actually being brought to the forefront. But I also really, really, and I've been saying this every time, I really need to challenge everyone to not wait for those specific days of pride, of Trans Day of Visibility, of trans remembrance. That is why we're in this issue, is because you are regulating us only to specific days to talk about our issues. We need to be a part of this 24/7, 365. And that is how we'll actually change society, if we continue to talk about trans issues and trans people in all spaces at all times, so that we don't suddenly have to worry about it when it becomes a headline because someone's passing a bill. These bills won't even be an issue if we continue to be seen and be heard in every space and every day.
Outstanding. Oh my God, I wanted Maria to come back. I thought she was going to come back. But I'm going to say I want to thank David, Kathy, and Miles so much for making this happen in the city of Santa Monica. We really appreciate this time and the effort that was put into making this panel happen. These are necessary. It's needed. We will continue doing the work. We will continue showing up. We will continue to free fall into our magic, into the void. Even when we don't know, we still show up. We do the work that is, put before us. And once we, when you learn something, you know something, you teach, right? That's Maya Angelou, and we just will keep this conversation going. Again, happy Pride to each and every one of you. I want to thank the panelists tonight, Patricio Manuel, Queen Victoria Ortega, and our very own, we miss you, Maria Carmen. But we understand there was some little difficulties, but even through the difficulties, we still got our message across. And the message is, again, that we're perfect, whole, and complete, that we're enough, that we're here, and that we're 100% pure love. So thank you all so much, and good night.